if you are a frequent viewer of the content that we put onto our multiple media streams here at Epiphany, you will know that we do daily messages. Sometimes it's Father Chris, sometimes it's Father Vince, sometimes it's me, and other times we do them in little groupings. And usually at least once a week, Father Chris and I will do one together. At that time, we get a lot of very positive feedback. Folks who say, boy, I really like when you just take a topic and you sort of pass it back and forth, because what comes out of that is sometimes meaningful. And so since we are in this time of COVID, when we are being forced to innovate, but that force is also a blessing, right? Because that forced innovate means that we are also being given the gift of the ability to innovate. And so it also means we have an opportunity to try things and fail. And that's what we're going to try right now. Hopefully not to fail, but we're going to do something we haven't done before, and that is take a Sunday sermon, and we're both going to do it in little bits and pieces. And so let's see where this goes, because I have no idea, my friends. Father? So it seems to me very clearly that if we're going to pick a Sunday to do this type of conversational sermon, that this is Spirit-given, because I don't know what you hear from it, but as I look at these readings, one theme just runs through every single one of them, and that is the topic of forgiveness.
Yeah, I think if you understand English, that would be an unavoidable conclusion, even right down to the first hymn where we're about forgiveness.
Right. And so as I look at this whole theme of forgiveness, I was really struck by the reading from Genesis. The story of Joseph. We all know Joseph's story, right? His father loves him best, so his brothers hate him. They throw him in a pit to essentially kill him, and then they think a little bit better of it. They sell him off to slavery, and he has a pretty miserable existence until he's actually rescued from that and rises to become the number one advisor to the Pharaoh, and that's a pretty good gig. And then he encounters his brothers, and after some Three Stooges-like chicanery, actually forgives them and identifies himself, and we have that lovely story. This part that we have this morning is at the very end of the Joseph narrative. For their father Jacob has in fact now died, and the brothers, who are not above being sort of underhanded, say, oh, well, now that Dad's dead, Joseph might actually visit retribution on us, so as we've done before, let's lie to him one more time. Let's say,
have to applaud their consistency.
They are consistent, and sometimes they don't learn, right? There's a point to this. They go to Joseph and they say, Joseph, right before Dad died, he said to us, tell Joseph to make sure he forgives his brothers. That's what his father would do, and that's what the God of his father wants him to do. No guilt trip there, right?
None.
No, of course not. And Joseph says, well, brothers, I've already forgiven you. It's all good. God intended this for good. Look at what I did. I became like the Grand Vizier of Egypt, and all is good, and you're forgiven.
And I like what he says, too, is, am I God?
Yes.
He asks rhetorically. I mean, this is like a goosebump moment of huge grace-filled forgiveness.
But what that has brought to my mind, and I'm going to put you on the spot, my friend, Joseph forgives, and Joseph is an amazing character because he forgives, but let's face it, it all worked out pretty well for Joseph.
Indeed.
He went through some really hard times, but, he's having a pretty good gig right now, and so I sort of wonder, if Joseph had not gotten out of prison, if he had been a slave, if he were still in prison, and were facing the prospect of death, and then the brothers showed up, would he have still forgiven them?
Father, I don't think in all our conversations I've ever shared one of my things I live by, one of my personal laws, and I'll share it with the whole congregation. I often say, there are no ifs. And it's fun to I'm not saying that it's not valuable sometimes to discuss things in the hypothetical, but, I mean, what if I were to say, well, what if Job is never restored? and God and the devil have had their discussion and the devil wins. The devil never wins in the Old Testament. There is no if of that either.
Right.
We'd say, well, what if the devil does win? The devil doesn't win. So, in this, and in terms of pastoral care, people say, I wonder if I had stayed married. Or, oh, they think of this long union. What if I had gotten divorced 10 years earlier and spared myself 10 years of misery? And you'll see them going to the place in the past which is undoable. And that will be often a time when I go, well, I do want to lovingly inject into this conversation. This is one of those moments where I want to say, there are no ifs. You were married exactly the number of years you were. And the reason we have the Joseph story is that God was so powerfully with him. He is the hero.
Absolutely.
But yes, if he had just been in prison and miserable, I guess I would say that stinks for Joseph.
It does stink for Joseph. But there is a point to this question, and I wasn't meaning to put Father Chris on the spot, even though it's exactly what I did.
No problem. This is what we're doing.
Okay, that's what this is for.
Right, no, bring the challenge.
The reason I ask that question is this. One could read the Joseph story and go, well, Joseph forgave, and that's why it's in the Bible, and it's really important for us. And I know that when I look at the gospel, Jesus says 70 times 7 and 409, whatever number we want to talk to, Jesus says forgive, 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 forgive. But part of me wants to say, you know what? It worked out for Joseph. Joseph was living in a multi-million-dollar mansion, had a yacht, servants, and all this great stuff, and he could forgive out of his largesse. That's not where I'm at. I was wronged, and yet I'm still living with the consequences of that wrong, and that wrong has caused this and that, and the coulda, the shoulda, the woulda, the ifs, all the things that you just mentioned. People find themselves in those, and they sort of get mired in those, and the question then becomes, am I supposed to forgive even when I'm in this place? And to that, the answer is an unqualified yes. That, my friends, is exactly the point. We are called to forgive and to forgive and to forgive. Without limit. Ooh, that's kind of tough. But that's what it is.
Just to sweeten the pot, when we do forgive like that, when we manage to have the faith that lets us forgive, or not even get angry in the first place, like Job, since I brought him up, great is our reward. So, again, if you're just going to be totally self-motivated and say, I'd like to be rich and famous and happy and loved and respected and sleep soundly at night and be without fear, admirable goals, learn how to forgive. If there are things that are unforgiven in your life, they will block all those other valuable rewards and gifts that God would give us and has given us, as we see in Job or Joseph.
Yeah. Holding on to old hurts means that you're limiting yourself. You're limiting what you can hold in your hands, and you're limiting what you can keep in your body. For forgiveness is cathartic, isn't it? It's good for you. It's good for everyone. I mean, somebody once said, holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die from it. That's not how it works. Forgiveness is a gift you give someone else, but my friends, it's also a gift you give yourself.
I'd like to mention the time component too. When we're staying unforgiven, we've taken ourselves, and this has been the spiritual flavor of the last decade of living in the power of now. But on the other hand, I don't want to be dismissive of that. I think it's actually a priceless theology and spiritual exercise to say now is what we have. Always, without exception, an unforgiven topic holds a person in the not now and in the past.
Right.
Without exception, and this is not God's desire for us.
And that lack of forgiveness in the past that you're holding in the present blocks you from the future, just as you were saying. And it's not necessarily about cars and yachts and all that kind of stuff, but it prevents you, it holds you back from becoming the person you could become if you used all of your potential and let that anger and that resentment go.
And closing with Joseph, you're right, it's not about cars and yachts. Joseph had huge resources at his disposal, and he was still that guy that's not only generous in forgiveness, but generous in feeding thousands of people within his tribe and outside of his tribe,
Right.
all during the famine, including known enemies, those people who would have killed him or had him sold into slavery.
Yeah, Canaanites and the Egyptians, not so much. And yet, Joseph was forgiving and magnanimous to them all. So forgive, my friends. It's one of the basic tenets of who and what we are. It's enshrined in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. But remember that our forgiveness needs to be just as good as the forgiveness that God has. And that's really the challenge. Look at the parable in the gospel. The one slave owed 10,000 talents. That's massive, massive, massive sums of money. And not only did the Lord forgive him and give him the time he asked for, he forgave the debt entirely. And yet he didn't show that same mercy to someone who owed him just this tiny little bit. So do the best you can to be a forgiving person. Live into that call to forgiveness. It'll help them. It'll help you. And it makes God smile. It's no harder than that.
Nope.
Amen.